Hello, Raymond here, back with another Project Feline Devlog. For the last little while, I've had my hands full with polishing Gabby's movement, revamping the combat, improving the art direction, and engineering various systems and tools to develop content for the game, and making devlogs to cover all those things. I still need a bit more time to finish cooking all that, but in the meantime, we're going to be covering a topic that I'm very passionate about that I haven't talked about in a long time. And that is the characters, world, and story of Project Feline. While it isn't mandatory for video games to have stories, I've often resorted to gaming as a means of escapism, and it's through world building and characters and stories that my favorite games feel like more than the sum of their programming. That experience is magical, and it's something I've always wanted to pass on to other people. What draws me the most to my favorite stories are the characters that star in them, and some of my favorite ones have had really cool designs and have been very fun to control. However, one gripe I've always had was that beneath the surface they felt very one-dimensional and more like cardboard cutouts that had to constantly stay on brand, rather than real characters that you could get to know that had wants, desires, and vulnerabilities. So it's been a goal of mine for a while to create characters of my own that have what I've always wanted to see, where they have strong and eye-catching designs, but also have a bit of soul in there, a bit of vulnerability. So how would one go about doing this? Designing characters with heart and telling a good story with them? Well, for me, it starts with ideation and knowing what you want to say. Long-time viewers of my channel may recall one of my very first devlogs, where I shared some of my early story ideas. Mind you, this was very early in development, before I even had a working prototype. This initial idea went something along the lines of Gabby having an older sister that would gift her this reflex augmenting suit that would let her do parkour and stuff, and then her sister gets kidnapped by the government and Gabby has to go rescue her. This was the very first idea I had. I made it up in 10 minutes on my sketchpad. That was basically it. That's all the thought I put into it. When I published that episode, I got comments from you guys saying that you were looking forward to it, and some of you said it reminded you of the story of Mirror's Edge. And at the time, I'd played a little bit of Mirror's Edge, but I hadn't played that much of it, and I hadn't finished the game. But since then, I have finished Mirror's Edge, and I realized that my story idea was essentially the same thing, and that I didn't really like it. I'm so sorry, Mirror's Edge fans. The game was very pretty and all that, and I love the art direction, but I just didn't feel engaged by the story, and I didn't feel attached to the characters. When I came up with my idea for Gabby's sister, I did it in the hopes that if it was a character that Gabby really cared about, then the audience would be emotionally invested in saving her. But in Mirror's Edge, I had a tough time caring and investing in Faith's mission to save her sister, because we, the players, don't see her sister that much. From my recollection, we only really see her at the start of the game and at the end of the game in like 2 cutscenes. It's also clear that the rest of the cast all have a prior history with each other, which you don't get to see in the game. And it creates this disconnect where Faith knows this character very well and she's very motivated to save her, whereas we, the player, barely know anything about this character. And I didn't want my story and characters to have the same problem. In certain mediums, like books or movies, you could probably get around this by giving the characters screen time and building up that relationship. But this is a video game. When I boot up Project Feline, I don't want to be treated to a 2-minute expository cutscene explaining the relationships between the characters. I just want to get in and start playing as soon as possible. But at the same time, I want to reward players that want that deeper connection to the world and characters in a way that is welcoming and not alienating. So with that in mind, I quickly decided to scrap the sister idea, to throw that character in the bin, and come up with a new cast of characters with which Gabby had no prior relationship. That way, Gabby and the player would always be on the same page. I came up with these character concepts some time ago, and I've posted some concept art online in a few places, but it's only occurred to me now that I haven't actually talked about these characters in my devlog series. So I guess some introductions are in order. Allow me to formally introduce you to Gabby's new companions. This is Calder, the big cuddly polar bear. Some of you may recognize him from a previous devlog I made about mission design, but I didn't go that much into him then. He arrived on the human world under mysterious circumstances. He lives alone on his boat. He's very insular, he keeps to himself. He's very risk averse, but he's very wise and can usually see things coming before others can. And I felt like he would make a good mentor figure for Gabby on her adventure. Gabby's other companion is Felix, a young, wide-eyed boy orphaned from a very young age. He had to quickly learn the value of grit and hard work to make his own way. Unlike Calder, who is very distant and cautious and averse to people, Felix is very nosy and very naive. And while he's a very hard worker, he's very lonely and has desperately wanted someone to call a friend. I had a lot of fun designing these characters, which I will tell you all about. When birthing any new character, I always need a good source of inspiration. And you may be wondering where I get this inspiration from. The truth is, I have stolen all of my ideas from my childhood sketchbooks. Back in the day, growing up, I spent just about all of my time in here. I didn't like playing sports and I didn't have many friends. The only skill I had was drawing and using the computer. It was through drawing and creating that I was able to escape into my own imaginary world with my own characters and stories. And it was always my hope that one day I could bring it to life for real and share that world with someone else. This is why I started making games in the first place, and it was from this world I created in my sketchbooks where Gabby was originally from. And I know her current design has deviated a bit from this, but I got attached to her pretty quickly, and over the years she grew up with me in a sense. She's gotten taller, she's gotten a bit bulkier, and her personality has developed a bit more as well. She used to be very timid and shy, much like I was at the time, but throughout the development of the game, she's become a lot more confident and playful and rambunctious, and I've tried my best to bring that through in the changes to her design. But Gabby was just one of many characters from those sketchbooks. When designing Calder, his design was repurposed from one of my childhood characters based on a teddy bear, which I still own. He's the biggest, cuddliest bear of them all, and I love him. But to cast him in Project Feline, I decided to give him a makeover. Instead of giving him the build of a stubby teddy bear, I rebuilt him into a large, physical beast. As for naming the character, his original name was Bill, and I needed to pick a new name that better fit the vibe of the game. If it wasn't obvious, I'm not the best at coming up with names. I know, shocking from the guy that named his game Project Feline. But for a lack of better ideas, one thing I tried to do was think of how the name would look like spelled out and what font it would look cool in. And I had the idea that I wanted his name to look really cool in Euro-style extended bold, which is a font I use quite often. I've used it on the Project Feline logo. My favorite letters from this font are the letter C, the letter A, and the letter R. So I tried to come up with a name that fit his personality that used these letters. The name Calder came up, and this is a Scottish name that means rough waters. Sometime later, I found another character to cast in the game, or rather, the character found me. I was sitting at my desk one day listening to Mirror by Porter Robinson just on repeat, and as I was listening, this inspiration just struck. So I got up my graphics tablet and started manically sketching, and Felix came out, a young, fair-haired boy with a baggy hoodie and loose clothing, and I instantly knew that this had to be a character for the game. I settled on his design very quickly. I drew maybe 2 variants of his hairstyles and 2 variants of his color scheme, and I was already satisfied with the design. He was definitely the character I've had the most fun designing. It was one of my favorite days when that sketch came out of me. I then sketched Felix and Gabby together in one drawing, and when I saw the final result, I imagined early in the story he would meet Gabby and just latch onto her immediately and kind of follow her like a little brother. And I really loved it. It intuitively felt like the right idea, and that was how Felix came to be. Sometime after designing these initial concepts, I played around a bit with their color schemes. A lot of my childhood characters didn't have color because I hated coloring in, but with digital tools like Photoshop, I have a much easier time with coloring. For these new characters, I wanted to be thoughtful with my color choices because I believe the colors you choose for a character are just as important as their shape or their hairstyle or their costume. And some characters that I really admire have color schemes that are so thoughtful and iconic that you could recognize them just from the color scheme alone. I first revisited Gabby's color scheme. I picked her colors very early in development and I hadn't put much thought into them at the time. But after looking at them day in and day out, I felt her skin tone was a little bit too pale and her costume lacked saturation, and I feel she just didn't stand out enough. I also wanted to give her a scheme that considered the other 2 characters and would make them look good together as an ensemble. So I drew up some concepts experimenting with different ideas. I tried an all pink costume, I tried green, but the one that resonated with me the most was this pink and blue palette. I got this idea for these colors from a photo I took of a sunset, And I don't know what it is, but whenever I get stuck on colors, I find that naturally occurring colors are a pretty safe bet because they just naturally look good. When doing Felix's colors, I quickly settled on a yellow and green palette. But just to make sure, I tried some other palettes as well. I experimented with teal and light blue and reds. I tend to use the color blue a lot, and I did try a blue variant with him, but with Gabby next to him, I felt like I was kind of overusing the blue a bit. So I stuck with this green, yellow, and brown sunflower palette. Calder's colors were a bit harder to decide on. I first picked this very Arctic palette with teal, blue, and white, but I found that it looked a little too similar to Gabby's color scheme. But I eventually settled on this red, cream, brown, and gold palette, and this is how they looked as an ensemble. One thing I've also picked up on with character design is to make each character stand out and look unique, it's really good if they each have their own distinctive shape. Good silhouettes and posing can help players recognize characters just from a glance. When putting them all together, I tried to make Calder very big and rectangular, Felix very small and circular, and Gabby somewhere in the middle in size, but very triangular with her ear and her haircut. All in all, I had a lot of fun designing these characters. I felt a lot more confident in this cast than the Gabby sister idea I left behind. So to anyone who was attached to the Gabby sister concept, I'm sorry, rest in peace Gabby sister. In retrospect, I do feel a bit stupid that I shared those ideas that early. I underestimated just how much things can change throughout the development of a game. Now to be clear, I'm not looking to make a story-heavy game. I don't want to have constant dialogue throughout the levels, but rather I want to have little moments in between each level to reward players for progressing through the game. I also don't have the funding to do something big like cinematic cutscenes or voice acting. But two things I can do very well are drawing character stills and writing text. I know these might not sound like a lot, but I believe a good story doesn't need high production values to stand out, and that as long as you have something sincere to say, then it'll connect with people. In fact, I've seen far too many games lately hide behind big budget cutscenes and voice acting to cover up a bad story. So through leveraging my own skills in drawing and writing, I want to tell a story in Project Feline that cohesively ties the characters and environments together to create an experience that feels more than the sum of its parts. In the last few months, I've implemented systems in the game that will allow me to accomplish this. And while the presentation is very primitive, just a text box with a portrait next to it, it's just simple enough to accomplish my goals and to maintain very easily. As a one-man developer, I have plenty on my plate as it is, so I needed the dialogue system to be simple to use and to iterate with. The entire system is integrated into one Excel spreadsheet where all of the dialogue lines are kept, so if I ever need to iterate on a line or change the wording of something or update all the portraits for a certain character, I could just do that all in the spreadsheet and it'll apply to the whole game. This is in contrast to something like voice acting, which is a lot more expensive to iterate on. Besides, I've seen plenty of games pull off amazing stories with just text boxes. As for the story in my game, I'm not going to go into specifics, there's still a lot I'm working out, but what I can tell you is the attitude and approach I'm taking with it. I want the central conflict of the story to really involve the cast, and for Gabby to have a personal stake in the events that unfold. With the cast of characters I have now, I can see a common thread with all of them, and that is that each character is misplaced somewhat. Calder is a talking polar bear. He's not of our world, and he's stranded here alone. Felix is of our world, and he looks like a normal boy, but he's an orphan, he doesn't have any parental figures or friends looking out for him, and he desperately needs someone to be there for him to help guide him through life as he grows up. And Gabby is a child of both worlds. She wouldn't fully fit in Calder's world, nor the world that Felix lives in, as a half cat, half girl, and because of what she is, she possesses unique abilities that no one else has, and that sets her apart, but also alienates her. And maybe there's some part of her deep down that resents what she is, but there's nothing she can really do to change that. So I, for one, am very curious to find out how she'll handle that, and with Calder and Felix, find a place to belong in this world where she's the only of her kind. So without revealing the story directly, those are my intentions with it. I've been picking away at it in the background and I've gone through about 12 different revisions so far. It is demanding to put an effort into a story and not be tempted to stick with the first random idea that comes to mind, while also balancing that idea with gameplay. My priority will always be gameplay first, but the thing I respect about my favorite games is when they put in that extra effort to not just entertain players, but enchant them. So that's all I got for this devlog. If you enjoy escapism, why don't you escape on down to Steam, where you can wishlist Project Feline, and leave me a comment about some of your favorite characters and stories from the games you've played. Or better yet, if you've ever tried to write your own story and characters from your own childhood worlds, I'd be very curious to hear about how it went. Thanks for watching through this episode. I know it's not a very technical one, but if you enjoyed listening to my thoughts on storytelling and what I'm trying to do, leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel to find out what else I've been up to. I've got more episodes to come. Thank you so much to my patrons and YouTube members for supporting these videos. I've got a few big episodes in the work at the moment, and your continued support really means a lot. If you'd like to support the devlog like these fine people, you'll get exclusive rewards in return, like access to my private Discord, early access to new episodes, your name in the devlog credits, and patrons get exclusive Project Feline merch rewards every 3 months. Thank you for following my development journey, and I'll see you next time.